Beckett, what happened 3 days before Christmas?
3 days before Christmas, my girlfriend looked me in the eye and said, "You can't come to dinner. I'm bringing my ex instead." I'd already wrapped the gifts I'd hunted down for her parents, and I'd been carrying a ring in my apartment like a secret heartbeat, waiting for dessert to ask her to marry me. I'm 27, the reliable kind. Project manager, steady paycheck, same Ashcombe, Ohio City since college. Not glamorous, just built for keeping things upright. I thought that was finally enough for someone. With her, it felt like it. Her family treated me like I'd earned a chair at their table. So when she dropped that sentence on December 22nd, my brain didn't even argue. It just went quiet. I left. And the part that still stings is this. She acted like she was doing me a favor. Months later, she'd spiral, convinced I'd found someone better. Then everything unraveled.
Before all that, who were you, really?
I wasn't the guy with a wild origin story. I was the guy you called when you needed something to get done. I ran projects for a mid-sized company, kept deadlines from collapsing, and lived in the same Ashcombe, Ohio City I'd stayed in after college because it made sense. My life didn't sparkle, but it held. Bills paid on time, kitchen stocked, laundry folded. I liked being steady. After enough messy relationships, I'd started to think stability was a liability. Like people wanted excitement, not someone who showed up early and remembered what mattered. Still, I liked my routine. I liked knowing where my keys were. I liked the quiet confidence of a life I'd built with my own hands. I just didn't realize how quickly someone could take that steadiness and call it a cage. Back then, I thought comfort was something you shared, not something you defended.
What did stable look like in your world?
The clearest proof that I could commit to something was parked outside. My Silverado. Paid off, clean. The first purchase that made me feel like an adult instead of a kid playing one. I'd bought it used from an older farmer who treated it like family, and I kept that standard. I didn't just drive it, I maintained it. I spent a weekend upgrading little things, cover, sound system, because I couldn't stand the idea of living with good enough when a few hours of care made it right. That's how my brain worked. Notice, improve, protect. When people joked about me being too put together, I'd laugh along, but privately I wore it like armor. If I could keep a machine running smooth, I could keep a relationship steady too. I didn't know yet that some people don't want steady. They want motion, even if it breaks.
How did your past shape your approach to love?
Before Isolde, I'd done my share of trying. The pattern was always the same. Things started bright, then someone decided I was too serious, like that was a flaw instead of a plan. After the last one burned out, I stopped chasing. I leaned into work, kept my gym routine, and poured the rest of my attention into an old Camaro I'd picked up off Craigslist. It was rough, stubborn, honest, exactly the kind of project that rewarded patience. The Camaro became my quiet therapy. Sand a little, fix a little, step back and see progress. Cars didn't punish you for being consistent. They didn't accuse you of suffocating them when you tried to make things better. That's why meeting Isolde hit the way it did. It felt like the universe had finally sent someone who wouldn't confuse effort with control. At least, that's what it looked like in the beginning.
How did you meet Isolde Varren?
Tobin Slate, my buddy, threw a summer barbecue in 2021. Nothing fancy, just smoke, laughter, lawn chairs, and people who'd known each other too long to pretend. That's where I met Isolde Varren. She was an elementary art teacher with an easy laugh and a way of looking at you like she was actually listening. She wore a sundress that didn't feel like a costume and carried herself like she was comfortable in her own skin. We started talking and didn't stop. She liked that I had my life together. She teased me about having real furniture and a real plan. She said it was refreshing to go on dates that weren't an afterthought. I remember thinking, finally, someone who sees responsibility as attractive, not dull. That night, when Tobin clapped me on the shoulder like he already knew, I felt something shift. Not fireworks, something better, a door opening. And for a while, I walked through it like it led to a future.
What made that relationship feel different?
Dating Isolde didn't feel casual. It felt directional. She asked about my work like it mattered, not like it was a placeholder until the next topic. She brought up meeting my extended family, asked what I'd do when my lease came up, and joked about me needing a bigger place eventually. The word eventually hung between us like a promise. What got me was how she framed it. Not as pressure, but as curiosity. Like she was already picturing the shape of a life with me and checking if it fit. She told me she liked that I planned things, that I didn't drift, that I could turn a simple dinner into something intentional. After hearing boring too many times, that felt like being understood. So I did what I always did when I cared. I paid attention. I remembered small details. I thought ahead. I assumed love was built the same way everything else in my life was built, piece by piece, with care. I didn't see the shadow forming behind that assumption yet.
When did you start believing it was solid?
The moment I let myself believe we were solid was in my garage. I was working on the Camaro, hands dirty, focused, when Isolde showed up with coffee like she belonged there. She didn't roll her eyes when I talked about rust and panels. She asked questions, real ones. She even helped, sanding, wiping down, standing beside me in borrowed overalls that made her look like she'd stepped into my world without needing to change it. That kind of effort does something to you. It turns romance into partnership. It makes you think, okay, we can actually build. She'd sit nearby while I worked, telling me stories about her students, laughing at the absurdity of December school chaos, and I'd feel lucky in a quiet way I hadn't felt in years. I started to relax. I started to plan out loud. And she didn't flinch, at least not then. She acted like she loved the fact that I had direction. That's why the shift later felt so unreal. It wasn't just losing her. It was losing the version of her that existed in my garage.
How did her family pull you in?
Her parents sealed the deal. Gideon Arkwright, her dad, was a retired firefighter. Old school, direct, the kind of man who didn't hand out approval unless you earned it. Somehow, I earned it quickly. The first time I went over for dinner, he pulled me into the garage like it was a test and a welcome at the same time. He showed me a project car, asked me what I thought, and watched my face like he could tell who I was by how I handled a wrench. We clicked in that simple way men do when they respect each other's work ethic. Sundays became a routine. Garage time, beer, talk about tools and life and what it means to show up. He started treating me like a son. Elowen Arkwright, her mom, treated me like I'd been missing from the family on purpose and she was correcting an error. Isolde seemed proud of it. She'd watch Gideon and me talk engines and smile like she liked the picture we made together. That's what I believed. I wasn't just dating a woman. I was being folded into a family. And that kind of belonging makes you bold.
What did Gideon teach you without saying it?
Gideon's garage was its own language. Everything had a place. Tools hung neatly, labeled like the room respected itself. He worked with a calm precision that made you want to do better, not because he demanded it, but because the space did. He told stories without turning them into speeches. Fires he'd fought, calls he'd never forget, the pride of doing a hard job well. He taught me things my own father hadn't had the chance to teach. How to be patient with stubborn parts, how to fix what you can and accept what you can't, how to keep your hands steady even when your mind isn't. Sometimes he'd pause, look at me, and drop a comment about when you've got kids someday, like it was already decided. I didn't correct him. I didn't want to. Those afternoons made the future feel normal, like the next logical step, not a leap. And because I trusted that normal, I started planning bigger. I started treating December like a finish line to a story I'd been building all year. I didn't know someone else was rewriting their chapter quietly.
And Elowen, how did she treat you?
Elowen had a softer way of claiming you. She'd pack leftovers like she was feeding my future, not my stomach. She'd text me articles she thought I'd like, ask my opinion on home projects, and pull me outside to show me her garden like it was a proud confession. She tracked plants, measured growth, cared about details the same way I did. Different subject, same mindset. It made me feel seen. With Elowen, I wasn't too much. I was useful. I was appreciated. She'd talk about family traditions with a warmth that made them sound permanent. Like once you were in, you stayed. And Isolde didn't seem bothered by it. She'd laugh when her mom fussed over me. Sometimes she'd even roll her eyes affectionately, like this was just how love looked in their house. That's what built my confidence. Not just Isolde, but the way her parents looked at me like they'd already decided I was good. When people start saying you're one of the good ones, you start imagining a life that matches that compliment. You start thinking about rings and holidays and the moment you'll make it official. I was already there.
When did you decide to propose?
By October, I'd made up my mind. I bought a ring and hid it in my place like it was a secret mission. The plan was simple. Christmas dinner at her parents', both families there, dessert on the table, and then I'd do it. I wasn't trying to be theatrical. I just wanted it witnessed by the people who mattered. I wanted her parents to see that I respected them enough to ask in front of them, not behind their backs. Gideon and Elowen weren't subtle about their hopes. Gideon dropped comments about marriage like he was testing the idea in the air. Elowen mentioned future grandkids with the casual confidence of someone who believed in timelines. Isolde didn't shut it down. She smiled. She leaned into the comfort of being loved. So I took that as permission. I told myself, this is the kind of relationship that can handle the word forever. I didn't hear fear in her laughter yet. I didn't notice the way, eventually, had started to sound less like a promise and more like an escape hatch. I only felt the urgency to make Christmas perfect, because perfect felt like the right container for what I was about to ask.
How did you plan that holiday season?
November turned me into a planner on purpose. I coordinated schedules early. I made a reservation at the steakhouse Isolde had mentioned, Copperline Chop House. Prime time, good table, the kind of detail that says, I listened. I bought a sweater in the color she'd once said looked good on me. I mapped out gift exchanges so nothing would feel rushed. I even ran through backup plans because that's how my mind stays calm. Anticipate what can go wrong and remove the surprises. I didn't do it to control her. I did it to honor the moment. Christmas was the first holiday that felt like it belonged to our future, not just our present. I wanted her to feel taken care of. I wanted her parents to feel valued. I wanted my family to see I was serious. Looking back, I can see the problem. When you show love by building structure, you assume the other person experiences structure as safety. You don't consider that someone might experience it as pressure, especially if they're already looking for a reason to run. But at the time, I thought I was doing everything right. I didn't realize right was about to be used against me.
What did you choose as gifts and why?
The gifts became my quiet obsession. Elowen had mentioned once a china pattern from her grandmother that she wished she could complete. I treated that passing comment like a mission brief. I spent weekends hunting through antique shops until I found pieces that matched. Gideon had casually referenced a firefighting history book, so I tracked down a special edition and ordered it like it was evidence of respect. For Isolde, I saved for something she'd wanted but never bought herself, a professional art set, the kind that makes a creative person feel seen. I didn't want her opening a random perfume gift and smiling politely. I wanted her to feel understood. Everything had intention. Every choice was proof that I'd been listening the entire time. I thought that was what love was supposed to be. Attention turned into action. And because I'd invested so much, my confidence grew. I started picturing her reaction when she saw the ring. I pictured Gideon clapping me on the back. I pictured Elowen crying happy tears. That picture was so vivid that it almost felt real already, which is why the first crack felt like someone scratching glass behind my ear, small but impossible to ignore.
What was the first red flag you noticed?
Early December, I showed Isolde the china pieces I'd found for her mom. I laid them out on my table with this stupid pride, like I'd pulled treasure out of the ground. I expected her eyes to light up. I expected her to share my excitement. She barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, that's nice," she said, like I'd told her the weather. I tried again, softer. I told her Elowen would cry. I told her how long it took to find them. Isolde nodded without meeting my gaze and went right back to scrolling. It shouldn't have hit me as hard as it did, but it did. The room suddenly felt colder, not because she didn't care about China, but because she didn't care that I cared. It was the first time I felt like a background character in my own effort. I wanted to blame it on stress. Teaching in December is chaos. Parent meetings, holiday performances, sugar-high kids. So I let it go. I told myself she was tired. I told myself it meant nothing. But something in me started keeping score, not out of spite, out of confusion. When the person you love stops reacting to your love language, you don't know whether to speak louder or go quiet. I went quiet, and she went further away.
How did her behavior change after that?
At first, her stress story made sense. She'd come over drained, complain about school demands, vent about parents, and collapse at my table with papers to grade. I cooked dinner, listened, tried to be a soft landing. I watched her thumb move across her phone between bites, a habit that felt harmless until it started to feel like a wall. I told myself she was decompressing. I told myself everyone has a coping mechanism. But I also noticed the way she answered questions like she was doing chores, how her attention slid away the moment I spoke, how "I'm tired" became a blanket explanation for everything. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at a message and the smile wouldn't reach me. When I asked about her day, she'd give me headlines, not details. When I asked who she was texting, she'd say, "Just friends," like the specifics didn't matter. I should have asked harder questions. I didn't. I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend. I didn't want to manufacture drama. I thought patience would earn closeness again. Instead, patience became the space where someone else moved in. And the name that started showing up in our conversations felt harmless at first, until it wasn't. Lucian Wexford.
Who was Lucian Wexford to her?
Lucian began as an old college friend who'd moved back to town. Isolde brought him up casually like it was trivia. Lucian thinks I should travel more. Lucian says small towns crush creative people. Lucian has all these stories from Larkwell, Illinois. I listened, nodded, tried not to react because people reconnect all the time, but his name kept showing up like a chorus, and her tone shifted when she talked about him, lighter, brighter, like she was breathing different air. She started speaking about adventure like it was a moral duty. She talked about being stuck. She talked about wanting more. I wasn't threatened by a man I'd never met. I was threatened by what he represented in her mind. Permission. A doorway to a version of herself that didn't include me. The scary part wasn't Lucian's existence. It was Isolde's hunger. She began to compare without saying the words. She'd mention how he just lives and how that feels real. She'd mention how I plan, how I structure, how I think ahead, phrases that had once sounded like compliments and now sounded like accusations. And I felt the ground shift under my feet without seeing where the cracks started.
When did it stop feeling subtle?
By mid-December, Lucian wasn't a detail. He was a presence. Isolde brought him up in almost every conversation. His opinions, his lifestyle, his worldview. Meanwhile, she became vague about her own. If she went out, she'd say, "with friends," and leave it there. If she came home late, she'd blame the day, not explain it. During dinner, she checked her phone with the reflex of someone waiting for permission to leave. When I asked simple questions, she gave me fog. "It's nothing. Don't worry. Just stuff." She wasn't lying in obvious ways. She was withholding in quiet ones, which is worse because it makes you feel crazy for noticing. I tried to anchor us with plans because that's what I knew. I mentioned the reservation, the family timing, the schedule we'd talked about. She didn't fight me. She softened me up. "Maybe we should keep it flexible," she said. "More spontaneous." Spontaneous. The word landed like a warning sign painted in a friendly color. I asked what she meant. She shrugged like structure was childish. I remember standing there thinking, when did my care become a problem? When did the future become something to avoid? I didn't confront her the way I should have. I told myself holidays are stressful. I told myself she'd come back to herself after the chaos. I didn't understand I was watching someone emotionally pack a bag without telling me they were leaving.
What happened when you tried to confirm plans?
On December 15th, I tried to confirm our Christmas plans. Not to nag, just to make sure everything lined up. Isolde's response was a soft refusal wrapped in a calm voice. "Let's not be so structured this year," she said. "Let's just see how it feels." I wanted to ask, how does dinner feel? How does my family feel? How does the fact that your parents expect me feel? But I held it down. I didn't want to turn a question into a fight. The problem with trying to be reasonable is that you can end up cooperating with your own disrespect. She talked about living in the moment like it was a philosophy, like planning was an illness, like commitment was a trap disguised as love. I watched her face as she spoke, and I couldn't find the warmth that used to live there when she said, "eventually." The countdown to Christmas felt different after that, less like anticipation, more like dread. Still, I kept wrapping gifts. I kept checking lists. I kept behaving like the man I'd always been, hoping consistency would bring her back. It didn't. It only made the contrast sharper when she finally dropped the truth.
Take us back to December 22nd.
December 22nd. I was in my living room wrapping the last gifts, the kind of quiet task that feels peaceful when your life is stable. I had piles organized by person, ribbons ready, tags written, her parents' gifts sat together, her gift near my knee, my family's gifts stacked neatly, everything in place. Isolde walked in wearing a face I recognized instantly, the one that says, "We need to talk," without saying it. I set the tape down. My mind started flipping through harmless possibilities. Schedule change, travel plan, timing tweaks. I even thought maybe she'd guessed the proposal and wanted to adjust the moment. She sat on my couch like she was taking a job interview and said, "I'm bringing Lucian to Christmas dinner instead of you." For a second, my hands forgot what they were doing. The ribbon slipped. The room tilted. I asked her to repeat it, not because I didn't hear her, but because reality didn't fit the sentence. When she said it again, slower, like I was the one being unreasonable, something in me went very still. I looked down at the gift I'd been wrapping. It was hers. The irony felt physical, like swallowing a coin. And she kept talking, like the words were already rehearsed, like my shock was an inconvenience she needed to manage.
What reasons did she give you?
Isolde explained it the way people explain betrayal when they want to stay the hero. She said things with polished sadness, that life with me felt mapped out, that my planning made her feel trapped, that Lucian made everything feel alive. She described my care as pressure, my attention as control, my desire to build as a threat. Then she said the part that cut deepest. She'd found the ring in my drawer. She said she was only saving me from humiliation, because if I proposed at dinner, she would have had to reject me in front of both families. She called it a favor, like breaking my heart was a considerate service. I asked why she went through my things. She shrugged. She said she was looking for a charger, and somehow the ring box ended up in her hands. She told me she was too young to get engaged, as if she hadn't spent months talking about the future with me. The whole time she cried like she wanted me to comfort her for what she was doing, like her guilt was my job to clean up. I felt anger, but more than that, I felt clarity. When someone can turn your love into an accusation, they're already gone. They just want you to help them feel justified.
What did you do in that moment?
I didn't argue. I didn't bargain. I didn't beg her to stay for the holiday and finish hurting me later. Something in me snapped clean, the way a rope gives up after enough strain. I gathered all the gifts I'd bought for her parents and placed them on the coffee table. "Give these to them," I said. "They deserve a Christmas, even if I'm not there." She stared at me like I was malfunctioning. I went to my bedroom, pulled her overnight bag from my closet, the one she kept there like she lived half her life in my space, and handed it to her. I opened the front door. She asked if we could still be friends, not because she respected me, but because she needed the story to end neatly. I told her no. I told her she made her choice and I wasn't going to help her feel better about it. She cried harder, frustrated tears, the kind that come when the script stops working. When she finally walked out, the silence in my apartment was loud. I sat down and stared at the wrapping paper like it belonged to someone else's life. 10 minutes later, I called Rory Calder and said only one thing: I need to get out of here. And he understood immediately.
Where did you go? Who held you up?
Rory didn't ask for a detailed breakdown. He heard my voice and treated it like an emergency. 20 minutes later, I was at his apartment with an overnight bag, standing in a space that looked like a grown man's idea of comfort. Gaming setup, snacks, neon light, no judgment. What happened? He asked, and I told him the truth in one sentence. Isolde dumped me 3 days before Christmas for her ex. Rory went silent, then said something sharp and ridiculous that made me laugh despite myself. That was his gift. He could crack a joke that cut through the fog without denying the pain. We sat down, controllers in hand, and played until the hours stopped meaning anything. Every time my mind tried to replay Isolde's words, Rory threw a new insult at Lucian, or a new line about how insane the whole thing was. He didn't let me spiral. He didn't let me romanticize her. He treated the situation like what it was: disrespect. In the middle of a match, when he asked if she knew about the ring, I felt my stomach tighten again. I told him she'd found it. His reaction wasn't sympathy. It was outrage on my behalf, and hearing someone else be angry for me made me feel less alone.
What did Rory say that changed your perspective?
When I explained the ring, Rory paused the game like he needed full attention for the level of delusion he'd just heard. She said she did you a favor, he repeated, like the words were poisonous. I nodded. Rory stared at me, then shook his head slowly. That's not just selfish, he said. That's Olympic-level selfish. He unpaused the game and immediately got taken out, which somehow made the moment funnier. Then he leaned back and said the sentence that stuck. You dodged a bullet the size of a planet. He wasn't wrong. I pictured a future where my entire personality, my effort, my planning, my steadiness, was constantly framed as a flaw. I pictured being married to someone who needed chaos to feel alive. For the first time, instead of only grieving what I'd lost, I could see what I'd escaped. Rory started predicting Christmas dinner like it was a comedy special. Her dad is going to hate that guy, he said. Gideon's going to eat him alive. I almost smiled. The thought of Lucian trying to impress a retired firefighter who valued work and loyalty felt like justice. That night, the pain didn't disappear, but it stopped being the only thing in the room. I began to understand that leaving wasn't weakness. It was self-respect, and Christmas morning proved it.
What was Christmas morning like for you?
Christmas morning, I woke up early out of habit, like my body didn't care that my plans had died. I made coffee, walked through Rory's neighborhood, and called my parents. I expected concern. I didn't expect the calm certainty in my mother's voice. She said they weren't surprised. Not because they didn't care, but because they'd sensed something I hadn't wanted to admit. She always seemed like she was looking for something else, my mom told me. Like you were a placeholder until something more exciting showed up. It hit me hard, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. I'd been so focused on building the future that I ignored the subtle signs she wasn't invested in it. My dad didn't pile on. He just told me I'd done right by myself. That mattered. I hung up and kept walking, letting the cold air do what it does. Wake you up. When I returned, my phone started buzzing. I hadn't blocked Isolde yet. Part of me wanted to see what she'd say. Part of me already knew it wouldn't be accountability. It would be consequences. By noon, the screen was lit up with messages. And the strange thing was this. The first wave wasn't even about missing me. It was about explaining my absence. That told me everything.
What did Isolde text you that day?
Isolde's first message wasn't, "I'm sorry." It was, "My mom keeps asking where you are." Then, "Lucian's trying, but he doesn't understand our traditions." Then, the gifts you got made my mom cry. She was narrating the disaster like she wanted me to come manage it. I read each line and felt something shift. Not satisfaction, just confirmation. She'd assumed I would still protect her from consequences, even after she replaced me. She'd assumed my role was permanent, like my effort was a resource she could borrow without respect. The strangest part was how she used my gifts as leverage. She was watching her parents react to my thoughtfulness and realizing what she'd swapped out. But instead of taking responsibility, she tried to pull me back into the story as the fixer. I didn't respond. I watched the messages pile up. Then I noticed something else. Her parents were reaching out too. That was the moment the situation stopped being a breakup. It became a moral rupture that everyone could see. When Gideon texted, I sat up. When Elawan texted, my throat tightened. Their words carried a grief I hadn't expected, like they'd lost someone too. And, in a way, they had. I was supposed to be at that table. I was supposed to be family. Isolde had broken more than my heart. She'd disrupted her own home.
What did Gideon and Elawan say to you?
Gideon's message was blunt. He and Elawan were furious with Isolde. He said I didn't deserve what happened. He thanked me for the gifts and told me I'd always be family to them. Elawan sent a long, tender paragraph that felt like a hug through a screen. She said she didn't understand what had gotten into their daughter, that she was sorry, that she loved me like a son. They sent pictures. Elawan using the china pieces like they were sacred. Gideon holding the book like it meant something beyond paper. Then Gideon added another photo. Him looking across the table at Lucian with an expression that needed no translation. Apparently, Lucian had decided to announce he didn't eat meat. At a Christmas dinner with a retired firefighter who considered a meal incomplete without serious protein. The scene played in my head and I almost laughed, not because it was petty, but because it was predictable. Lucian was a vibe. Gideon was a foundation. Those things don't mix. Isolde texted again that night. I think I made a mistake. Can we talk after the holidays? I stared at that sentence and felt the pull of old loyalty. Then I remembered the couch, the wrapping paper, the word favor. I started typing. I deleted it. I put my phone on airplane mode. Her chaos wasn't going to become my responsibility again.
Why did you choose silence after that?
Putting my phone on airplane mode felt like closing a door with both hands. I wasn't trying to punish Isolde. I was trying to protect myself from being recruited into her regret. I had a dozen responses I could have sent. I could have told her she'd humiliated me. I could have asked why she let her ex into our relationship without ever inviting honesty in. I could have argued that planning isn't control when it's built with care, but I didn't trust myself to say it once and walk away. And I wasn't about to be dragged into a conversation designed to soften her guilt. Silence was the cleanest boundary I had. Over the next days, messages continued from different angles. Isolde, her friends, even hints from mutuals. Each one carried the same theme. She felt bad, she was struggling, she needed closure. None of them started with, I did something wrong. They started with, help her feel better. That pattern confirmed the choice I'd made on December 22nd. A person who can replace you 3 days before Christmas doesn't suddenly become considerate because their plan backfires. They just want a new plan. 2 weeks later, she called late at night. I answered because I wanted to hear the truth, not because I wanted to reopen anything. Her voice sounded raw, like she'd been crying for hours, and the first thing she said was the only thing she could say. Lucian left.
What did she say when Lucien left?
Lucian left, Isolde whispered like the words were supposed to break me into sympathy. She said he'd been just having fun over the holidays, that he didn't want anything serious, that he was going back to Larkwell, Illinois. She said she'd thrown away everything we had for someone who was never staying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I just let the silence stretch until she had to face what she'd done without my help. When she begged me not to be cruel, I asked her what she expected. She chose the man who lived in the moment over the man who planned ahead. Living in the moment meant he wasn't planning to stick around. That wasn't cruelty. That was math. She tried to soften it with excuses. Young, scared, overwhelmed. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. The problem was, she'd already taught me how she handled pressure. She escaped, then called her escape freedom. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved that the illusion had died. The version of Isolde I'd built a future with wasn't real anymore. Maybe it never had been. After that night, she kept trying. Calls, voicemails, messages from her friends. Pressure dressed up as concern. And the more she chased, the clearer it became. She wasn't grieving love. She was grieving the life my love had provided.
What came next through her friends?
Her voicemails grew more desperate over the weeks, like each one was trying a new key on a lock I'd already changed. Then her friends started reaching out. Cassia Renford first, then Sable Hartnell, messages that felt less like support and more like a campaign. She's really struggling. She's learned her lesson. She needs closure. The word closure was thrown around like I owed it. What they really meant was comfort. They wanted me to ease the consequences for her, to offer a conversation that could be turned into proof she wasn't the villain. They wanted me to participate in rewriting the story. Meanwhile, Rory was sending me screenshots of Isolde's social media posts. Sad quotes, dramatic captions, moody coffee shop photos. It was the kind of public grieving that asks strangers for validation. Rory's commentary was ruthless, and I laughed more than I should have, not because her pain was funny, but because the performance was familiar. She'd claimed I was suffocating her. Now she was broadcasting how empty she felt without me. The contradiction was loud. I stayed out of it. I didn't clap back online. I didn't reply through mutual friends. I kept my boundary simple. No access. The more people tried to shame me into giving her a conversation, the more certain I became that she still didn't understand what she'd done. She thought consequences were negotiable. By March, the messages finally stopped. I heard she'd moved back in with her parents and started therapy. And for the first time in months, the silence felt like room to breathe.
How did you rebuild your life after it quieted down?
The calls stopped the way storms do. Gradually, then suddenly. I heard through mutual friends that Isolde had moved back in with her parents and started therapy. I didn't celebrate that. If anything, I hoped she actually did the work, because repeating the same damage in a different relationship would be its own kind of prison. What I did feel was space. The absence of her drama left room for me to decide what I wanted outside of a future I'd been building around someone else. I started doing small things that were just mine. Weekend plans with no purpose beyond enjoyment, walks with my phone in my pocket, mornings where I didn't feel like I had to prove I was fun enough to be chosen. Rory kept me grounded. He refused to let me turn the breakup into a personality. Whenever I started spiraling into, what if I'd done less? He reminded me that the wrong person will always ask you to shrink. He reminded me that love shouldn't require self-erasure. That became my new rule. I wasn't going to become smaller to fit someone's fear. I wasn't going to apologize for being thoughtful. So I leaned into the parts of my life that rewarded consistency. I signed up for a photography class on a whim. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a door. And I walked through it, not knowing it would become my way back to myself.
What did photography give you?
The photography class was at Ashcombe Community College, taught by an older guy who'd worked back when newspapers mattered. He didn't romanticize art. He treated it like craft. That appealed to me. He taught me manual settings, light, patience, things that felt familiar, just in a new form. I dug out an old Nikon that had been sitting unused and started carrying it on weekends. At first, I shot anything. Sidewalks after rain, old storefronts, quiet streets at dusk. Then, I started documenting the Camaro restoration. Grease, metal, hands, progress. The camera gave me a way to see my own work differently, like proof that time invested becomes something real. Those weekend shoots turned into solo trips around Ohio. State parks, small towns, back roads. I wasn't running away. I was expanding. For the first time in a while, my life felt like it belonged to me again. A few photos ended up selected for a local art show. It wasn't fame. It was validation that I could make something meaningful without anyone's permission. Isolde had treated my structure like a trap. The camera showed me structure could be freedom too, when it was chosen. And while my weekends changed, my weekdays shifted as well. The same planning Isolde resented started opening doors at work.
What changed at work for you?
Work got better in a way that felt almost ironic. The same traits Isolde called suffocating, organization, foresight, attention to detail, were exactly what my job rewarded. I got promoted, better projects, more responsibility, a raise that made my chest loosen, like I could breathe deeper. I started managing bigger timelines, coordinating more people, solving problems that actually mattered. Meetings didn't scare me, they made sense. When chaos showed up, I didn't collapse into it. I made a plan. People trusted that. My boss trusted that. There was a quiet satisfaction in being valued for who I already was without having to perform spontaneity like a talent show. I'd spent months wondering if I was too much. Work answered that question clearly. No, I was built for building. That confidence didn't erase the breakup, but it rebalanced the story. I wasn't rejected because I was flawed. I was rejected because my stability didn't match her hunger. And once I stopped seeing my steadiness as a problem, I started taking risks that actually mattered to me. Not emotional roulette. Real choices. The first one was something I'd wanted for years. A motorcycle. Not to impress anyone. To feel the road. To remind myself that being responsible didn't mean being lifeless.
Why the motorcycle? What did it mean?
I bought a used Harley Sportster that wasn't pretty, but it had potential. It felt like the Camaro all over again. Beat up, honest, worth the work. Rory and I tore it down in his garage on weekends, piece by piece, laughing when something didn't cooperate, cursing when it did, and celebrating every time we brought it back a little closer to life. There's something about working with your hands that steadies your mind. When you're focused on rebuilding an engine, you can't replay old conversations on loop. You can't debate what you should have said. You just fix what's in front of you. You control what you can control. The first time we got it running clean, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the breakup. Pride without bitterness. Not, I'll show her. Just, I'm still here. I wasn't reclaiming Isolde. I was reclaiming myself. The version that didn't need permission to be solid. Rory joked that my dating life sounded like a machine that wouldn't start. But the difference now was I wasn't chasing sparks. I was rebuilding my foundation. I spent more time with the guys, sports bars, pool, nights that were simple and easy. And in that steadier life, I did something Isolde never expected. I met someone who didn't want me to be less. Her name was Seraphine Ashford.
Who is Seraphine Ashford to you?
I met Seraphine through a hiking group I joined almost by accident. She wasn't loud. She wasn't trying to be the center of the trail. She moved with a calm confidence that made you trust her without knowing why. We talked during a long walk, work, family, small things. She told me she'd grown up on a farm outside Cedar Lane, Ohio. She knew how to fix things. She didn't glamorize life. She respected it. On our third date, she said something that landed like a hand on my shoulder. I like that you remember things. It makes me feel like I matter. No one had ever said it that plainly. Isolde had called that same trait controlling. Seraphine called it care. We built slowly. She didn't make spontaneity a religion. She didn't treat planning as a threat. She treated it like partnership. She appreciated effort. She reciprocated without making it feel transactional. Being with her felt like exhaling. Not because there were no problems, but because I wasn't defending my character every time I tried to love someone. I didn't have to guess whether my attention would be mocked. It was wanted. That was the real contrast. With Isolde, I was always trying to prove I wasn't boring. With Seraphine, I didn't have to audition. I could just be. And by the time the next Christmas rolled around, Seraphine wasn't nervous about my holiday intensity. She welcomed it. She even asked for it, which should have been the end of the story. But Isolde hadn't finished turning her regret into obsession.
When did Isolde reach out again?
Our first Christmas season together, Seraphine and I were picking out decorations like it was the most normal thing in the world. Tree, garland, small arguments about colors that ended in laughter. She told me she'd always wanted to experience a holiday where someone actually planned ahead. I warned her I could go overboard. She kissed me and said, "Promise me you will." Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was simple. "Hey, it's Isolde. I'm doing much better now. I was hoping we could catch up." I didn't feel tempted. I felt tired. I showed Seraphine. She read it, looked up, and asked one clean question. "Do you want to respond?" I thought for 2 seconds. No. I deleted the message and put the phone away like it was trash. Seraphine nodded like she respected the decision, not like she needed reassurance. That mattered more than any speech could. We went back to debating decorations. Life moved forward in small, ordinary ways, which is what I'd wanted all along. Then Tobin invited us to his holiday party. It felt safe. Mutual friends, familiar faces, an easy night. I didn't know Isolde would be there. I didn't know that the first time she'd see me with Seraphine in person would be the moment her regret turned sharp. I walked into that party feeling content. I walked out realizing some people don't let go just because you do.
What did it feel like seeing her again?
Tobin's holiday party was the usual mix. Music, drinks, people catching up like the year hadn't hit them as hard as it had. Seraphine and I showed up late, smiling, comfortable. I was talking to Tobin about his new job when I felt the air change. Not in a mystical way, just in the way your body recognizes a threat before your mind labels it. Across the room, Isolde stood near the punch bowl, smaller than I remembered, phone in hand, checking it like she was waiting for an escape route. She didn't look happy. She looked staged, like she'd dressed for a moment that wasn't happening. Seraphine spotted her before I said anything. "Is that her?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Seraphine didn't tense up or panic. She just took in the scene with calm eyes, like she was collecting information. Isolde watched me in a way that wasn't curiosity. It was possession, the kind of stare that says, "You're supposed to be mine, even if I threw you away." I tried to ignore it, to keep the night normal, but Isolde moved like she'd rehearsed her approach. She crossed the room and stepped behind me until I felt her presence at my shoulder. When I turned, she wore a forced smile and held her drink like a shield. "Beckett," she said, too brightly, "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." And the performance began.
How did that confrontation start?
Isolde started with compliments. How I looked healthier, how I seemed different, how it was good to see me. Then I did the one thing she clearly wasn't prepared for. I made Seraphine visible. "Hey, Isolde," I said. "This is Seraphine, my girlfriend." Seraphine extended her hand immediately, polite and genuine. "Nice to meet you," she said, like an adult. Isolde didn't take the hand. She looked Seraphine up and down instead, like she was evaluating a purchase. Then she turned back to me as if Seraphine hadn't spoken. "I've been thinking about us," Isolde said, voice tightening. "About what we had. The plans." I kept my tone steady. That was a long time ago. Isolde leaned in, eyes locked on me, still refusing to acknowledge Seraphine. "Don't you miss it?" she asked. "The way you used to plan everything? The way we used to be?" The audacity wasn't just in the question. It was in the setting. Public, social, like she could pressure me into nostalgia. Like she could erase the last year because she decided she wanted the benefits back. Seraphine didn't shrink. She didn't get dramatic. She stepped forward slightly, still calm, and did something Isolde wasn't ready for. She spoke the truth out loud. Not to fight, just to exist. And that's when Isolde's mask began to crack.
What did Seraphine say, and how did Isolde react?
Seraphine smiled and said, "Beckett's been amazing. He's helping my mom perfect her Christmas dinner recipe, and he found the most thoughtful gifts for my nieces and nephews. It's one of the things I adore about him." I watched Isolde's face cycle through emotions she couldn't hide. Shock, jealousy, anger, something close to panic. Then she turned venomous. She looked at Seraphine and said sweetly, "How nice for you. It's easy to appreciate someone before you've had to deal with their obsessive need to control everything." Seraphine's expression didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened. Isolde ignored her again and focused on me. "Can we talk privately?" she demanded. "Without her?" "No," I said, clear and flat. "Have a good night, Isolde." She followed us toward the door, voice rising. "You're really choosing her over what we had?" she asked. I stopped and looked back once. "I already did," I said, "the day you uninvited me from my own proposal." Something in her snapped. She shouted across the room, loud enough to freeze conversations. Friends rushed in to grab her arms. Sable threw an insult at us as we left, calling Seraphine a downgrade, trying to turn cruelty into loyalty. Outside, Seraphine squeezed my hand and said, almost calmly, "That looked like someone watching their future walk away." And in a way, she was right. Isolde wasn't losing me. She was losing what my steadiness gave her. The problem was, she didn't accept loss. She escalated.
What changed after that party?
After that party, things got strange fast. Seraphine started receiving messages from blank social media accounts, passive-aggressive lines about "enjoy it while it lasts," and accusations that she'd stolen someone else's happiness. One account pretended to be concerned, suggesting Seraphine should ask me about my commitment issues. It was amateur manipulation, but it still felt invasive. Seraphine showed me everything. We documented it, then laughed a little because laughter was easier than fear. But the obsession didn't stay online. Isolde started showing up at my workplace. She'd sit in her car in the parking lot and stare at the building like she could will me outside. Security recognized her. Cameras caught her waiting for hours. My boss asked if I needed time off to handle a personal situation, and the embarrassment burned hotter than anger. My private life was bleeding into my professional reputation. Then she called coworkers. She tried to recruit people to talk sense into me, like I was making a mistake by moving on. Rory told me she even called him, begging him to convince me that Seraphine was wrong for me. At that point, it stopped being sad. It became unsafe. We stopped treating it like drama and started treating it like a threat. And that's when we went to the one place that doesn't care about feelings: the law.
How did it escalate into something legal?
Isolde's harassment escalated from messages to actions. Fake accounts left comments on our photos calling Seraphine a placeholder. Her friends joined in with little taunts, like a middle school pile-on. Then Isolde started leaving gifts on my porch. Flowers, notes about what we had, lines that tried to turn obsession into romance. It didn't feel romantic. It felt like someone refusing to accept reality. Seraphine was genuinely unsettled. I was, too. So we got a restraining order. Clear distance, clear consequences. For a while, it worked, until one night, months later, we heard pounding on the front door. Isolde's voice carried through the wood, drunk and desperate, yelling that Seraphine wasn't better than her. Rory was with us that night, and he spoke through the intercom like he'd been waiting for the moment. Firm, mocking, warning her the police were on the way. Seraphine recorded it. The cops arrived. Isolde was arrested for violating the order and causing a disturbance. Neighbors watched like it was a show, but to me it felt like a final confirmation. This was never love. It was entitlement. We never heard from her again after that. I proposed to Seraphine with the same ring I'd once bought for Isolde. This time, it didn't feel like a risk. It felt like placing something precious in the right hands. We're getting married next summer, and the best part is simple. I didn't win by hurting anyone. I won by living in a life where my care is welcomed, not punished. Watch the full video and support Broken Relationship Tales.